Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And I want to welcome all of you to our panel on climate and water. I have with me Nada Majdalani. She's with EcoPeace, where she's the director of the Palestine office, and she focuses on connecting climate, energy, and water security. I'd also like to welcome Nadim Farajala. He's at the American University of Beirut, where he's the director of the Climate Change and Environment Program. And like me, he comes from an environmental engineering background. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Before I get the conversation started, I want to let those in our audience know that you can send in questions. We'll get to as many of them at the end as we can. You can tweet those at the hashtag US Middle East, or you can email them to events@brookings.edu. And we look forward to seeing those come in. But let's get started. Nadim, can you get us started by talking about how energy security and water connect in your region, both physically and how are the regional governments prioritizing this issue? How are they approaching it?
Thanks, Samantha. It's good to be here with you on this panel. Quite an interesting topic to start up with. Energy and water are heavily interlinked, and in ways some people don't realize at times that they are, and especially in our part of the world. The Middle East, North Africa region, or if you want to call it the WANA, the West Asia, North Africa region, depends on how far you want to go in, rely a lot on a combination of groundwater as a dominant source, as well as surface water that is dominating in big basin areas like the Nile, the Euphrates, and the Tigris. For example, energy is needed to pump water from river sources up to reservoirs and then to distribute it. And also energy is needed to pump water from the groundwater and to distribute it. Energy is also needed to desalinate. And a lot of the energy in the Gulf countries goes into desalination. And in many parts of the Gulf countries, they are pumping from depths that for groundwater that are in excess of 2 kilometers. So there's a heavy reliance on energy. On the other side, water can be a source of energy. Hydropower, though it represents less than 2% of energy in the Middle East, is also a source of energy. Also, wastewater is a source of energy in terms of when we treat wastewater, we end up with sludge. This sludge can be digested, and from that digestion, we can get energy. This is the big picture, if you will. How much is this being paid attention to? It depends. The Gulf countries are energy rich. They don't have to worry too much about energy, and they can desalinate as much as they want. Currently in Saudi Arabia, for example, 65% of oil use is for desalination, of domestic oil use is for desal. And by 2025, 10% of revenue in the Gulf countries subsidizes the water sector. So there is that huge interlinkage there. 1.5 million barrels of oil per day are needed to desalinate around 24 million cubic meters of water, more and more. If you move over to the Levant and to the Maghreb countries, you will get now the influx of renewable energy, the use of solar powered pumping, and the use of photovoltaics in huge arrays to power. This is now getting more traction, and governments are more and more getting interested in that, because right now oil is fairly cheap. But a few years ago, it was quite expensive, and that was a very lucrative area to expand into. So this is briefly, I guess, what those linkages. Thank you.
Seems like we're moving somewhat from turning oil into water into turning renewables into water, which is good from a climate perspective as well. It's exciting to see. Nada, can you talk a bit more specifically about energy and water security in the Levant and how they connect in the region you spend most of your time thinking about?
Yes, definitely. I mean, this is definitely a crucial topic for the Middle East and the Levant specifically. When we speak about energy and water security and we link it to climate change, we are often thinking also of the broader security issues. Let us give an example of, for instance, the uprising in Syria, which has started actually because of water shortage and water insecurity. When farmers were not able to basically cultivate, and there was excessive pumping of water resources, and the inability to replenish that, and also the fragile system of the government that could not actually support alternatives for these farmers. This has actually led to repercussions on the overall security of the country, and then the repercussions on the region overall. And now we have refugees sitting in Jordan, in Europe, and everywhere around the world, just because of the failure of some systems to recognize that water and energy security are very much intertwined with the regional and global security. When we look at specifically, because our organization, EcoPeace Middle East, works in Jordan, Israel, and Palestine, and when we address these issues, we look at specifically water, access to water for citizens, specifically in Jordan and Palestine. We are in a water scarce region. We are very much dependent on natural water resources, which are very scarce. There's overpumping. Specifically, we are looking at Gaza Strip as one of the examples of the world where there's excessive overpumping and intrusion of seawater, which is also affecting the quality of water. In Jordan, we are looking at the far distance between the water resources and the centers of high population, like Amman and Irbit, whereas the source of water is approximately 300 to 400 kilometers away. When we look at Palestine, this is more complex because water issues are very much also connected to the political conflict and to the inability of the Palestinian Authority to access water resources because of the current arrangements that we are stuck with throughout the past 25 years. And so, therefore, when we look at these, equations with a million something refugees sitting in Jordan, with the deteriorating situation on ground for the Palestinians, when there's, some communities in Palestine, they receive water during the summer months of, once every 3 months. Or even they're obliged to buy it through black market with very, very high prices. This also leading to food insecurity, economic insecurity. It is a recipe for disaster. And when we look at Israel, that is more somehow achieving or on the road of achieving water security with desalination, with the reuse of treated wastewater. We are looking here at a standalone system that is looking at itself like an island. However, if we look at the entire region, if we are not thinking collectively of the repercussions of water and energy insecurity, then we're not addressing the issue overall of the regional security as a collective issue. And here's why we sometimes, when we think as an organization of ideas outside the box, we we thought of something that is called the water energy nexus, where energy from renewables can be produced from Jordan because they have the vast areas where they can put solar panels. In return, Palestine and Israel, they can produce desalinated water from the Mediterranean Sea, and they can create these interlinkages and interdependencies in exchanging these resources, similar to the idea of the agreement of coal and steel, which brought the European Union from the ashes of World War II. So here we are linking water energy interconnections with the overall interest for regional sustainability and stability, and as a matter of climate change adaptation and mitigation.
I want to come back in a moment to the political implications of that, because there are many and they're very interesting. But I'd also like to take a moment and go back to Nadim just to talk about desalination for a minute. We've talked a bit about the stress on surface water and on groundwater in the region. Is desalination the way forward? What are some of the pros and cons of the technology, and how should the region think about that as it thinks about how to approach a changing climate going forward?
Desal is not really the, it's the last resort for me, at least. I think of it as a last resort. It depends where you're from, actually. If you look at the Mediterranean rim countries, desal is an option that's best kept latest. There are so many resources available that if managed properly, they can push desalination further down the road. But eventually it will, at some point, we will get to have to desalinate. Not all countries. The problem with desalination is you have to build these facilities along the coast or a little bit further inland, and the energy needed for that is quite high. And not all countries have access to that. And you have to develop not only the source of power that's needed, it's the grid, and the connectivity of the grid is important. Jordan has stopped a lot of the renewable energy projects right now to reinforce the grid so that they can take on this additional source of energy and of power. So energy is needed. These facilities, desalination facilities, are on the coast, and the coastal areas, I mean, you can look at the Côte d'Azur and you know, and all those nice places. Do you want to put a desal plant right there? You know, it is aesthetically not pleasing. Financially, you can make maybe a little bit more money by, you know, developing that area somehow. So it is in a high cost real estate. It is this is just being the surface. But then when you start looking at the brine that's produced and what is being returned into the sea, and the Mediterranean is a closed sea to a great extent. It is closed. And the Nile is dammed, and it's going to be further dammed now with the Renaissance, the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. So the amount of water reaching the Mediterranean is progressively getting less, plus rain is going to get less with change in climate. So the salinity of the sea, just the Mediterranean, is going to rise because of such activities. This is problematic because it will affect the livelihood of many people living along the coast, fishermen, etc. So it's a chain reaction that's happening. My sense is we need to first focus on managing the resources that we have, reducing, cut down losses, use less water, reuse whatever we use, and then try to, you know, save water from, you know, the wet period to the dry period as much as we can. Surface storage, subsurface storage, whatever we can get to. Desalination would be our last resort, but you know, the Gulf countries are there. They don't have, they don't physically have that water, so they have to do it. The challenge now is to find means of not throwing that brine back into the sea and try to do something that is more constructive or less harmful to the environment with that brine. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that perspective. It's important to note that desalination is definitely not the free lunch solution to all this. And in addition to being very energy intensive, you also have the problem of waste, which I don't hear a lot of people talk about, Brian, but it is really important because you create a lot of it when you're desalinating all that water. But that said, there are some places where it is a necessary technology. And Nada, I'd like to come back to you to talk about some of the thoughts that your group has put together about the way forward in the Levant and the way that green energy and water provision can work together.
Yes. So as I mentioned, and let me here maybe also recap on the various issues and important issues that Dr. Nadim has put in place. What we are proposing in terms of the water energy nexus for the Levant or for the Middle East is not an alternative to what needs to be done on ground in various areas in terms of reforming the water sector, in providing the appropriate infrastructure, particularly on the Palestinian and Jordanian side. There needs to be a reduction of the losses from the networks, which could reach up to 40 and 50% in some areas. We need to look at more energy efficient ways for producing water. We need to reconsider a lot more reuse for our wastewater, domestic and industrial. But also for the region, there's an additional complexity, which is the natural water resources allocation between Palestinians and Israelis. And this is also another dilemma which even international community is heavily involved in. When we speak generally about desalination here in the region, the notion pops out that we are actually giving up Palestinian water rights from natural resources. And this is not the case, because this has been disputed over the 25 years and has been put as one of the final status issues for negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis. But in the meantime, because of the political complexity, we cannot afford, as Palestinians or as Jordanians or as the region overall, to accept the status quo. Things need to be worked out in parallel. And when we propose the water energy nexus as a solution for the region, we did not only think about it for Palestine, Israel, and Jordan, but we also thought about it for the entire Levant. We look extensively and intensively on, for instance, the Jordan River Basin, and also how we can integrate water and energy security in this area, involving other countries like Lebanon and Syria. How can we engage the Gulf at the moment, countries in areas that are in the south, also in desalination and solar energy around the Red Sea. We look at Egypt, for instance, also as a partner and an important player when it comes to water and energy security issues to Gaza Strip. So when we think of the Levant overall and an exchange process of water and energy nexus and linking it to climate security and regional security, it is not instead of or jumping beyond the wall of and the political barriers, but we look at them basically as trust building measures, as potential ways forward to move on the more difficult files, which are stuck in terms of the geopolitical arena in our region. And by that, as I mentioned, it comes with also not only geopolitical benefits, but it also comes with financial and economic benefits. Because when we look at solar energy production and export, which can be wheeled to Palestine and Israel, produce desalinated water from clean sources, not from conventional energy sources. this also is an encouraging factor to private sector. So we're not asking the government to take care of these issues, but we're actually asking our governments to set out the appropriate regulatory environment which would enable private sector to actually be the driving force for implementing such a project.
Yes, I think everything that both of you are saying points to the importance of the word "and" in this process. I work on energy systems for the most part, and I'm always saying we need that technology and that technology and that technology. And this is true in water resources as well. There's no silver bullet, only silver buckshot. I have a question from the audience that I think I'll go ahead and send to you, Nada, and that is, how have the Abraham Accords impacted the water landscape in the region? Can you go ahead and take that question?
Until the moment, it really hasn't brought any immediate impact on the water sector. But what I can say is that we're looking eagerly at what is coming next with the new Biden administration towards its foreign policy in the Middle East, particularly now that we're seeing also that with engaging the Gulf countries in the region, with the new vision of the new Biden administration towards climate change issues, with appointing John Kerry as a special climate envoy, and finally also congratulations on signing again to the Paris Agreement by the US. We're looking at a more maybe now fostering environment potentially towards looking at climate change cooperation and cross-border cooperation, and fostering, first of all, the mediation role, and mobilizing the financial resources, either from the Gulf countries or from the US or even from the European countries, because now we see that potentially with as people working in the sector who have been seeing a lot of a lack of resources and a lot of lack of political will to move forward on some of the aspects that are relevant to resolving some of the transboundary wastewater and water issues, when it comes to also funding for infrastructure projects and large-scale infrastructure projects, and also safeguarding the security of these infrastructure projects and providing also some guarantees on these investments. So we haven't yet seen the direct and immediate impact, but we would like to see down the road potentially maybe more private sector engagement in green businesses in the region, and potentially collaborations on technology transfer and know-how, which would actually put us in a better shape for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and enabling us to basically manage our water resources in a more efficient way.
I'd like to continue in that vein with you, Nadim. Thinking about how you can turn the intersection between water and energy and climate perhaps into a building block for relations within the region and perhaps with the new Biden administration, making that more of a building block for relationships rather than the stumbling block that it's been in the past. Can you talk about things that the Biden administration can do to help further the kind of political will that we need for cooperation on these subjects?
This is the testy question here. Historically, the transboundary relationship in the region has been adversarial in some aspects, and it has not been conducted according to any UN convention on transboundary waters. It was basically sort of governed by military strength. If you look at the Euphrates Tigris, Turkey has the upper hand because militarily it is stronger than and has been stronger than Iraq and Syria. On the Jordan River, Israel is dominated by militarily, and it's the downstream country, dominated Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the Palestinians, and took what it wanted. Both countries took what they wanted from the water, and it didn't work out well. It may have worked out better for Israel than the other riparians. If you look at the Grand Renaissance Dam, Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, it has triggered it is more destabilizing than what people anticipated. And there is, I don't know if the internal friction in Ethiopia is due to the GERD or as a diversion of the GERD, and the current tension between Ethiopia and Sudan over the refilling, the second phase of the refilling, but there is also tension there. So the Biden administration has a lot on their hand to diffuse this and to work towards more of working within international norms and agreeing to international norms in dealing with transboundary waters. There are, certain embedded rights that do no harm, the prior utilization of waters, etc. These are all embedded in these conventions and in these international water laws. And this is, I think, would be a very sound basis to start from, rather than using water as an adversarial tool, as bending people's elbows to push countries one way or another. And it's not too difficult to get. I mean, the technology in terms of desalination and is getting better and better. And many countries in the region, as we said before, are using this. So water is no longer an existential threat to many countries, not anymore. But getting to it at a reasonable price, having the water security that is needed for countries or communities to live healthily, to be productive, and to be sustainable in their growth, requires that access to water becomes easier and less of a struggle. Right now, if you look at some countries or some parts of countries, it is a major struggle. If
Nadim,
I may just jump to now.
We're losing
The
your
Iraqis
for just a
were
moment.
always viewed as the breadbasket of the Middle East.
Nadim, we're losing you for a moment. I'm going to move over to Nada to talk about some of these issues. I mean, if you think of an area where scarcity of water has really become an issue, Palestine and Jordan are really important areas, and in the Jordan River Valley. I'd love to hear you continue some of the points that Nadim's making.
Well, yes. If the last thing I quote from Nadim was food security, and indeed, when we look, for example, at the Jordan Valley, that is shared between also Palestinians and Jordanians, they have the same characteristics, and they have the same maybe struggles in terms of access to water. Poverty rates are very high. Unemployment rates are also soaring. We're looking at 40% unemployment between youth, specifically in the West Bank, almost the same percentage in Jordan. We're looking at a reduction of of the rates of the contribution of the agricultural sector to our GDP. Looking back in the early 1990s, for instance, in Palestine, the agricultural sector used to contribute to around 13% to 14% of the Palestinian GDP. Today, we're only talking about only about 3%. Similarly, is the same percentage in Jordan. It's about 3.5%. Of the contribution of the agricultural sector. So we're definitely looking here at issues that are relevant to instability in food security, but also instability in economic security and job creation. This is a boiling pot basically for the region, especially among the young generation. If I have to look at another hotspot, it would be the Gaza Strip. We're talking about 2 million people who have been sitting under blockade for the past 15 years. The blockade not only includes food, medicine, or construction material, but also some essential material that is necessary for the development of the water sector and sanitation sector and energy sector. Gaza today lives in a status where the underground aquifer is non-suitable for human consumption. A UNICEF report mentioned that Gaza will not be livable by 2020. We're now in 2021. 97% of the water aquifer is damaged. People live under dire conditions. We have like 85% of poverty, high rates of unemployment, and the security instability because of the division between the West Bank and Gaza has also exacerbated the situation. So you can imagine that also the energy insecurity in Gaza has also led to the inability for the water facilities and wastewater facilities to operate in an appropriate way. And here's where we need to recognize the regional interlinkages. When Israel is blocking Gaza all over these years, when water is not supplied sufficiently, when material that is necessary and energy that is necessary for water and sanitation projects are not being efficiently and appropriately mobilized, the repercussions are not only on the Gazan people. The repercussions are not only on the public health of the Gazan people, but it is transboundary. On a daily basis, there's around 100,000 liters of untreated sewage that is traveling north from Gaza towards Israel, polluting beaches, and also causing some of the desalination plants that are huge on the Israeli side to shut down because of the pollution. And this has been brought up to the attention of the Israeli public, and eventually the public could not stand still because of a mobilization effort by civil society organizations like us, who have put responsibility that, okay, the security reasons that Israel is coming through with in terms of the blockade on Gaza, they have repercussions on Israel itself, and it's like shooting themselves in the foot in terms of also impacting the water security of the Israeli citizens themselves. So here's where really water and environmental issues need to be looked at outside the spectrum of militarized security systems. They need to be looked at in terms of collective developmental and mutual interest systems that offer the ability for all parties to be able to have same ability to develop and access water resources and access appropriate services in a manner that they can be working in an integrated manner against the difficulties that we're going to be seeing until the end of the century. I mean, with climate change in this region, we're looking at 30% less precipitation. We're looking at soaring temperatures reaching up to 4 degrees Celsius. We cannot afford doing this on our own, each country by itself. We need to look at the transboundary potentials and possibilities. We need to look at also water issues as a low-hanging fruit that could actually lead to the stabilization of the region rather than a means for division. I think Dr. Nadim is back. I don't want to.
Yes, he is. I'm happy to see him back. Yes, you raise a lot of issues. Water issues never stay within political boundaries. And the other issue I hear you raising is that water, it's not just an economic good, it's also a fundamental human right, and makes other things impossible if you don't have access to water. And Nadim, this really raises a question that I got from the audience, I think is a really good one. What does water security in the Middle East and North Africa region mean for global security? How might this further not respect boundaries? And what might it mean for global security?
Yeah. Well, look, the world is a village, right? Somebody said that not too far back. So yeah, look, water security, when you want to think about it, is not the traditional, and this is how we've been approaching it here at the Isam Ferris Institute at AUB. This is how we're looking at it. Water security is not about how much water do I have, how many people do I have to give it to. Water security is a whole set of issues. Water security is about that, affording people water, but it is also about the environment from which we take the water and the environment to which we return the water. It's about the infrastructure we use to convey and store that water and treat the wastewater. It is about the productivity of that water. Keep that point in mind. It's about the hazard, floods, droughts, etc., that are associated with it and how countries plan to face up to that. So I just want to touch upon these two. There is the other one, the sixth one is governance and how to deal with that, with the rules, the regulations, the institutional framework, the capacity of the people to run the systems, etc. But if we focus on two issues, hazards such as floods and droughts, and the productivity of the water that we're using. Starting with the hazards, if countries do not plan and implement measures to protect their communities, their society against droughts, and prepare in advance through technology, through forecasting, through tracking weather patterns and shifts, looking at trends, developing all the needed science to be able to track, then we can forecast droughts and prepare against those. And rules should be in place to help that. Storage, use of water, etc. All of these come there. Floods as well. Floods are devastating and quick to happen, and we need to turn those into something that's good, where we can benefit from the excess water that comes in and divert it somewhere where we can store it. These are two quick issues that we can get. And then the productivity of that water is essential so that people can make a decent living, whether in agriculture, whether in industry, etc. What that means to people living in there. If a drought happens and we are ill prepared for it, people will then have, and we've seen that in part. I disagree with Nada a little bit about the Syria issue. The drought did not really cause the war. There were many other aspects, but drought was one of the aspects, and it displaced 150,000 families all of a sudden. Imagine those people now, something happened. Instead of heading southwest, they went northwest, all the way through Turkey to Europe. And Europe suddenly now shut its doors, and you've got refugees from Syria all over the place in Turkey and in Greece. This is an added stress. These people are not necessarily water immigrants. They are climate immigrants. They are environmental immigrants. Droughts do the same thing. Also, when people cannot make enough or live decently from water-driven industries, agriculture or whatever, they tend to pull up roots and then head somewhere else and move. Typically, in our part of the world, there's a huge rural movement, has been for a while, from rural areas to the cities. More than 60% of the Arab world lives in urban areas. This is a big number, and this is growing. And the demands for water, even though they are less than agriculture, but the social services required, the waste generated is much higher. This tends to breed tension, and then tension would spill into conflict. It happens. And this conflict then triggers other conflicts or gets translocated to other countries. So it is imperative that we empower and build the capacity of local communities at all levels to be able to manage their resources within a bigger context, of course. This, I totally agree. We need to build a bigger picture and within that manage our resources so that at the end of the day, people live with dignity and have access to water, clean water in good quantities that enables them to live a healthy and productive life. This is where the crux lies. And then if you then mess with that balance, it's going to have a ripple effect and reach out elsewhere. That's it for now.
I hear you. What I hear you saying implies a really strong need for infrastructure. When we think about this region and climate change, we tend to think about overwhelming heat and droughts, and forget that climate change often entails just more energetic weather in general, including flooding and all of these things. And then the increasing urban nature of the region all cries out for additional infrastructure. Are governments understanding this need, approaching this need with the kind of care that is required? And what can the international community do to help or learn from what's happening in the region? How can we make some of these connections?
Look, the problem with infrastructure is not building it oftentimes, it's with maintaining it. People there's been a lot of money that has been sunk into more or less decent designs. But once you sink in, you put in this capital investment, managing and operating these requires money. And people don't build this into the lifetime of a project and develop the budgets for that. That's one side. Another side is people do not, once they build those infrastructure, wastewater treatment facilities, sophisticated desalination plants, etc., you need the capacity to manage this. And if you don't build it locally, then the total continuous reliance on outsiders becomes problematic. Some countries are working well on that. They're building that, they're designing it properly, and execution is more or less okay. We need to maintain that. The key issue in our infrastructure is, it depends on what parts of the Arab world. Many places lack storage facilities. The Levant is poor in its ability to store water. And if you store on surface storage, dams basically, and reservoirs, with climate change and the increase in terms of temperature, that the evaporative losses are going to be higher and higher. But then what do? Can you store in the subsurface? Probably not, because many of these areas are karstic in nature, and you put water somewhere, it ends up somewhere else, and you can't get it. So there needs to be a confluence of, research that helps improve on the storage, that there needs to be more and more work done on reducing leakages, unaccounted for water, whether that's technical or outright theft. There needs to be help in terms of reducing demand. The reduction in demand is critical. Very few countries are working on that end. They're starting with increasing supply. That's wrong. We need to address the issue of try to harvest as much as we can of rainfall. And in parts of the Arabian Peninsula, if you look at Yemen and Oman is very well known for fog harvesting. They do a very good job at that. And this is part of something that we can do in the Levant as well. But it's not part of our tradition because more or less we had enough water for us at that time. So I don't know, the international community can help in doing that, but they have to be responsive to the local agendas rather than to their own political agendas. That there are some donor-driven projects, whereas the countries use donor money to sway politically one group or another, and with not really ultimate benefit to the people that are being targeted. This is something that needs to be worked on to be truly a benevolent donor rather than a donor with lots of strings attached.
Oh, my unmute didn't want to unmute.
Can I add maybe one additional thing?
Please do.
To what Dr. Nadim has mentioned, I think not only the technical capacity is required, but also some of the issues that are also related to the institutional setups that are required. You can get the best technicians and engineers in the world to put the fittings and to put pipes together and maintain the systems, but also maintaining the system means that there is the appropriate institutional capacity to recover the financial costs and to be able to basically drive revenues and collect fees appropriately that would cover actually the operational costs and maintenance costs. And this is very often in our region a big dilemma. Which definitely also the international, the donor community should look at very, as Dr. Nadim mentioned, look at specifically and with great concern when they design and they pick up technologies that are highly costly and they require a lot of financial appropriate management.
Yes, you both make terrific points. It's from thinking of the donor community, it's very excited to build a new facility and cut a ribbon, but keeping the operations and maintenance going and the funding and the nuts and bolts of trying to balance supply and demand isn't nearly so sexy, frankly, attractive to the donor community, and it often gets overlooked, which is a real shame. I'd like to hear more from you, Nada. I got a question about, it's quite specific, but an interesting one. Could greater investment in batteries to enhance Jordan's ability to store solar energy improve its capacity to pump desalinated water? A bit of a specific question, but an interesting one about the linkage between renewable energy and water supply.
So definitely storage capacity would an improvement in the technology of storing solar would help. But if we are more specific, maybe it depends on what kind of desalination we're talking about or where is it coming from. If we're talking about storage facilities on the Jordanian side for large-scale solar fields, which would store the energy and enables Jordan to basically export energy to Palestine and Israel 24/7 and wheel this energy from Jordan towards and through the West Bank towards Gaza and towards the coastal lines in Tel Aviv, then yes, it is potentially a great idea. However, it is at the moment not cost effective. The technology has not reached yet to a point in terms of the storage capacity to make this possible in terms of cost recovery, and it is not still very attractive for businesses to basically invest in this, and for entrepreneurs to invest in this technology on the larger scale capacity. As we move forward and we see how the technology is improving, potentially yes, but at the moment, with the current basically agreements between at least the Palestinian and Jordanian side, in terms of importing electricity from the Jordanian to the Palestinian side, we are looking at a mix of energy and mostly coming from conventional resources. But if we want to make a big leap and jump in terms of Jordan being an exporter of renewables 24/7, we definitely need to look at and see improvement in the storage capacity and technology, but also in the cost effectiveness of this technology.
Yeah, those words 24/7 are really the kicker. They're the most important part. We're starting to run low on time, but I'd like to ask a wrap-up question of both of you, and I'll start with you, Nada, and then we'll go back to Nadim. And that is, given the new Biden administration is concerned about climate, what is the one piece of advice you'd like to give them on managing the energy-water nexus in the Middle East? What's the one thing that's most important for them to address, or the most important thing that the U.S. can do as it re-engages on these issues?
Yes, that's the $1 million question that we're all waiting for to hear. We, at least as an organization, when we look at our experience over the past 26 years, we have compiled an experience and a set of steps and vision for the region to address climate change issues and water and environmental issues. I think we need to look at 3 steps or 4 steps. The first step is to amplify people's engagement and awareness, and across all levels, in terms of youth, women, farmers, local community leaders, activists, you name it. When it comes to also some specific areas in our region, we need to look at hotspots such as the Jordan Valley, for instance, and look at what can be done in terms of investments that can be done there, in terms of infrastructure, engaging also private sector community in terms of innovation in businesses that are green, that are tackling issues that are relevant to renewables, smart agriculture, technology, etc. The other level would be fostering the exchange of water and energy between the countries. And the fourth would be, and the most important, would be prioritizing the reallocation of natural water resources so that the Palestinians can get also their fair share of natural water resources from the aquifers and from the River Jordan. These are the 4 steps which EcoPeace Middle East has put together in a concept or a report called the Green Blue Deal for the Middle East. And this is where we are trying to engage international community on the various technical but also political levels and diplomatic levels to engage or to foster discussions, at least on the higher level among our governments, to look at climate change issues within these 4 steps, but also to put the necessary investments. And we look at the Biden administration and its new vision and interest in climate change issues, and its new entry to the Middle East peace process as a key player. We look at a lot of attention from the Biden administration at the diplomatic level, at the mediation level, but also at the infrastructure development level. So there's a lot to do. And as Dr. Nadim mentioned, all over the world, we're expecting that the new administration has something to give and to contribute.
There are certainly high expectations all over the world on this and many issues. Dr. Nadim.
Yeah. Oh, look, we have in terms. I'm going to take a bigger picture look at this. The Middle Eastern countries have acceded to the Paris Agreement. But there are a lot of trepidations amongst the oil-producing countries about the push towards decarbonizing our economies. And this is leading leading some countries like Saudi Arabia and others to resist this it's not rapid, it's snail pace. It's really terrible how fast we're moving towards achieving the Paris Agreement's goals. I mean, we're not even doing half enough or quarter enough yet. But the Biden administration can work with its traditional ally, the Saudis, in allaying their fears and in helping them transitioning and diversifying their economy into something that is less reliant on total oil production for fossil fuel. And there are other uses for petroleum products that can be integrated using modern technologies that would enable less polluting countries. This will then lead to less pressure by the Saudis and the Gulf countries on non-oil producing countries in the negotiations in the Paris, in the climate change negotiations, because right now oil producing countries are dictating the pace for negotiations, and this is coming at the expense of the Levant countries, which are not oil producing, and we have differing issues, but because most of our countries here are reliant on Saudi support, financial support, and Emirati financial support, and Qatari financial support, so many countries toe the line, and that costs them. So the Biden administration, through Secretary Kerry, fantastic choice, brings foreign secretary experience with a huge, fantastic drive for the environment. This brings together. This can help allay fears and support the smaller non-oil producing countries in their endeavor to go towards more renewable energy, to support renewable energy development, and then to support the greener development of these countries. This is the big push that can happen. This is a big ask. This is a very big ask. But we cannot afford not to address the decarbonization and help countries that rely on fossil fuel for their existence, basically, to scale back and find alternative sources and support this alternative sources rather than mine it and dig deep into that. This is what I would like personally from the Biden administration.
Yes, it's I hope someone is listening. That it's a difficult ask, but it's definitely at the crux of the issue. I'd like to say thanks so much to both of you for sharing your time and your expertise with me and with everyone watching. And with that, I'll close the session. But thank you to all of you who are watching as well.
Thank you for having us here.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.